afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Omohundro Institute's Digital History Coffee House. I'm, as always, your host, Jim Ambuske of the R2 Studios at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. Joined, as always, by Martha Howard, who will be on shortly, and Laurel C., who is in for the assist from the Omohundro Institute. And we're very excited to have an excellent digital project today, taking us back again to the era of the American Revolution, but looking also concretely at textual studies and material culture, which is both an excellent source of research, but also a terrific teaching tool as well. So I don't want to take up any more time than is necessary so we can get to the action, as we'll be talking about the Denig Manuscript today. It is my pleasure to introduce Catharine Roeber, who is in the research division at the Winterthur and is as an assistant professor of decorative arts and material culture in the Winterthur program in American material culture, with primary fields of expertise in the history of material culture of the Americas from the colonial era to the 20th century. Rebecca Parmer is the outgoing director of the Winterthur Library, which is an independent research library known to many of us for the study of American art, design, history, and culture, and as an affiliated assistant professor in the University of Delaware's Winterthur program in American material culture. And Jason Heppler, who is my colleague here at George Mason University. He is the senior developer scholar at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. He's also an adjunct professor in the Department of History at George Mason, where he teaches on public history. And in addition to basically keeping our entire tech stack alive and running and making our projects work, he is also the author of Silicon Valley and Environmental Inequities of High-Tech Urbanism, out recently from the University of Oklahoma Press, a timely topic. And as we once again face an imperial crisis, let's go back to the era of the American Revolution and talk about the Denig Manuscript. Team, the floor is yours.
So thanks again for having us here today. Really excited to present this project, to hear feedback on the project. It is just a little spoiler alert. It's a project that is designed wonderfully, thanks Jason and others, to grow. So we add scholarship to it and be thinking about how this best lives on, best can be used for teaching and other purposes that we maybe have not even imagined. So I did some of this you can read, but I will verbalize just sort of like, what is this thing? How did it come to Winterthur? And how did this project begin? So the subject of this whole project is the Denig Manuscript. That's how we refer to it most frequently. Named after its author and creator, Ludwig Denig, who lived in Pennsylvania. Life dates you can see there, 1755 to 1830. So he's really spanning this, fascinating time of centered on conflict, settlement, settler colonial relations in Pennsylvania, with many different groups coming in contact, in particular in the areas where he was, sort of Lancaster, as well as up near Ephrata in those areas. The book itself was put together as an entity in 1784. Of course, there could have been parts of it that had been worked on earlier and bound together. Those are some of the questions that we brought to this manuscript. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But how did it come to Winterthur? This was actually found in a family and was not something that was on people's radar until sort of the end of the 20th century. At that point in time, there was some awareness of it. In particular, of course, many of you on the screen will be familiar with the name Don Yoder, who was a Pennsylvania German scholar. It became on his radar. He had access to this manuscript, which is a combination of text, watercolor images, as well as a section that is script for songs, so the scores. But he became familiar with this, and actually he printed a 2-volume work that some of you may have seen in 1990 that did wonderful scholarship on this book. It also reprinted the images and some of the text, although not every little bit. And that has been a nice resource that was known. Then the family decided, because Pennsylvania German collecting was something that we were fairly active in around 2020, and a little bit before that, for a whole host of reasons I can talk about if you're curious. It was something that we knew about. They knew that Winterthur would be a fantastic place for this to live in complement to other Pennsylvania German, Germanic, and Pennsylvania early PA and early American materials, both in the museum and library collections. So it was acquired, part gift, part purchase, this was a whole gift, excuse me, in 2020, and came into our two collections. At that point in time, our curator of visual arts and culture was Stephanie de la Mare. This was something that really piqued her interest. Previously, Lisa Minardi, who now is at Historic Trap, was also involved with this manuscript. But Stephanie was so interested in this early American sort of bringing together of peoples and what it could express. She was also very interested in the promise of a digital project with this. What could we do potentially that would enhance access and an enhanced understanding of this, that would move beyond what we could have in that 2-volume work that is still very useful, from Don Yoder. And so that's when the connections began to emerge with the center. Also, she put together a range of scholars and had a sort of more internal focused study day. We had people from regional indigenous communities, early Americanists, religious scholars, people from Germany, people from the United States, all coming together to think through, what do we want to know about these? What would be helpful? What would be interesting? A key component of this as well is, of course, the conservation work and the forensic analysis. As this came together, we received the wonderful funding from the Getty Preserving Paper Project, and then working with the center. And then there was an additional gift for accessibility for this. So that's sort of what fueled the project. And so we were able to do that conservation work with students and staff on site, that helped inform those conversations with a small group. And then later on, we had a more public facing gathering, once some of that work that had been done and discussed initially, to share that out. That included everything from singing the songs. That's a key component of this. Christopher Herbert, who is an early Americanist musicologist, he has recreated the sound of Ephrata, some of the songs there, and then he was able to work with other musicians, and so that's a key component of what we've done here. So again, acquiring that object, really taking the time to understand it, to think about it from various perspectives, ask good questions, have the important partnerships that we had, have the two gatherings, and then we moved into really the heart of designing this project. Now, partway through the project, our dear former colleague, Stephanie de la Mare, went to the Carnegie Museum. And at that point in time is when Rebecca Parmer and myself took over the sort of co-stewardship of this with our partners at the center. As an early Americanist myself, and as Rebecca is someone who's a deep scholar of the American history, as well as library approaches and digital humanities projects, I think we really were able to get into this and take it over and perhaps steward it to in a way that you'll hear about more, that made it a realistic project to get finished. So I'll turn it to you, Rebecca.
Sure. So, as Catherine mentioned, part of our task was to pick up a project midstream. We wonderfully had all of the evidence from the previous study days. I know Catherine was able to attend. I actually joined Winterthur in 2022, so after many of these days had already happened. So for me, it was an exercise in learning this wonderful document, which is just this incredible devotional resource. a man's experience in Pennsylvania German colonial contexts. But also to think through how to make a three-dimensional manuscript accessible and engaging in a digital realm. So some of the things that we considered as we were kind of regrouping around this project were questions, editorial questions about translations and transcriptions. That was always a key component of this, being able to take the original German, which is in a vernacular form of sort of a high German, Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, and to make that accessible to modern audiences. So I'm just going to scroll through a few of these pages here. As you can see, the handwriting can be quite difficult to read. So we wanted to make sure that there was some way for audiences to be able to explore the text here. We had some questions about, whether to modernize this German or whether to leave it in its original vernacular context. And we took the approach of, for the moment, preserving it in its original German and building in capacity later to perhaps translate this to a more modern German context. But also to provide an English translation. And we worked with the wonderful Jeff Bach, who was formerly associated with the Young Anabaptist Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies at Elizabethtown College, who just did this incredible job of translating, transcribing the original German, as well as translating it into English for modern audiences. And when we get to the point where Jason's talking about the tech, I think we can talk a little bit about some of these decisions about how to actually parse out the language on these pages. So we wanted people to be able to engage very deeply with the manuscript as a manuscript, so as a readable object. We also wanted to be able to provide some context for this work, so providing an opportunity for the scholars who worked to contextualize and provide insight into various aspects of its cultural and social significance through a work by Alexander Ames, who's a scholar, director of outreach and engagement at the Rosenbach Museum, but a scholar of Pennsylvania German studies. Thinking about the calligraphic style, the actual writing style that is present, which is unique to the Pennsylvania German community at this time, by Chris Herbert, taking the hymn settings and understanding this as understanding these hymn settings in their musical and textual sourcing from Denig's context as coming from a Lutheran and Dutch Reformed church background, and then Will Fenton, who is another scholar of Pennsylvania German studies and early American studies, thinking about the violence that is present in this book. One of the most, I think, engaging things about this manuscript is that all of the scenes within it are depicting some kind of biblical scene or moment in the life of Christ and the resurrection. But Denig is putting this, or he's putting this to paper in its colonial context. So using the language and the visual culture of his life living in pre-colonial and colonial Pennsylvania German contexts. So the architecture, the botanical language, the clothing of all of these scenes in Christ's life are translated into this context of, living in Lancaster County and in the surrounding region. And so as a visual object, and Don Yoder does a wonderful job exploring this in his 2-volume set. But being able to sort of analyze this from a visual language, visual culture perspective, as well as in Fenton's essay, and thinking about how the political and social unrest that is occurring at the time is being translated into, this devotional, very personal manuscript. So there's opportunity here to explore these essays and to connect out to other projects. In Fenton's case, using Digital Paxton, to study the music settings of these. So we pulled these out as separate pages. You can explore the book as a book or manuscript as a manuscript all the way through, beginning to end, but you can also go straight to the music. And I don't know if this is going to...
I know, I wonder if it's going to...
I'm going to try it. But from here, being able to explore these scores, to read the transcriptions, and then to listen to them. Explore on your own, please. But being able to listen to these wonderful hymn settings. And then Herbert took it a step further and actually translated these into modern musical settings that can be reproduced and sung for modern choirs. So being able to sort of see and explore, zoom in quite in sort of quite detailed manners, to listen to the music, and then to explore some of the forensic element. I don't know, Catherine, you want to talk a little bit about the forensic analysis piece?
Sure. Yeah. If you want to scroll down, because maybe we could also show them the tree of many colors or in the margin.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because that also will give you more of a sense of sort of the images, the wonderful imagery that's here. Yeah. So this was looked at comprehensively, trying to understand how the book was put together, because one of the main questions was this made at Ephrata or was it not? And looking at the book structure, to just keep it simple, we actually think not. Paper potentially from Ephrata, but actually there are other elements that we think that this is something that Denig himself, informed by his work with shoes and leather in other contexts, actually bound himself. Informed by some of the regional traditions. There were, it's so tightly bound, which actually shows a little bit of a rookie move here, that it's hard to fully understand the entire binding without undoing the whole thing, which of course we are not going to do. But we could see through X-ray, like the sewing structure. Of course, again, damage is a good thing for us sometimes, for a conservator to be able to look at. There you go. You can sort of see the interior structure of the book. There was a pigment analysis that was done on the watercolors to, again, see, did this sort of match other things that were happening either in Fraktur or some of the Ephrata materials themselves. And what you're really seeing is evidence of someone who's using, like, going to, for lack of a better term, going to the paint store and going to the arts and crafts store and getting a little bit of this and getting a little bit of that and getting what we would expect for the time. So wonderfully, there's nothing that seems like, oh, whoa, no, this is a fake, this has been done later. But that really you have the materials that you would imagine for 1784 applied in a way that, again, is informed by some of the more professional art and print work of the day, but very much handled by someone who was just very advanced, but amateur. So that pigment analysis, the paper analysis, the structure analysis were some of the main things. Then there are some of these questions, again, of comparison with similar use of the Fraktur or not, other comparative objects that are not exactly the same. I mean, this is an oddball in many ways from, again, these different traditions of print and works on paper. I'll leave it at that because people can ask more questions later on, but
yeah, and I think at this point, Jason, I can stop sharing and turn it over to you if you'd like to talk about the tech side.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think from the start, to kind of start out here, I'll mention like how we built this and the tech we use to build this kind of thing. We use something called Django. Django is a web framework built in or written in Python. It's a web framework we use around our CH&M, primarily for projects that require, any kind of like data-driven work or might require a kind of a content management system sort of behind the scenes. But it also means we can do things like provide kind of this WordPress-like interface where, PIs on the project or different leaders within the project can add content, they could add essays, they can add all sorts of things. And more easily then sort of maintain the site. The site can kind of grow with you as it lives on beyond the time that we have like active development time on the project. And one of the things that is always a challenge, I think, in really in any digital history project, but it's certainly the case, I think, when it comes to something like this, where we're taking an object and we're trying to represent it digitally, right? And I don't just necessarily mean that we're scanning pages and putting them online, but there's a way in which, especially with something like this that we build in Django, where a lot of time is spent trying to think about the data model that can represent this thing, right? So how do we take this like abstract organization of elements and properties and other things, and then relate that to some kind of real world object? In my experience, this takes time, sometimes lots of time. There's always like a first round of it where I sort of like make my best guess about what these things should be. And then you have this sort of iterative process beyond that that continues to sort of refine what this thing is and how we can represent it well. In the case of the Denig manuscript, it looked actually something like this. It was fairly simple when we finally got down to it. This is what the model looks like. I won't get too in the weeds here about what this is, but just to point out a few things. So we, of course, have the whole manuscript, as Rebecca was showing you earlier. So we have each of these pages in here. Each page then is represented within the database, and all of the metadata and images and other things that belong to these pages were all just recorded in the database, so we can pull that up here in the application. In the model, what we do is we represent that as something I call a document. So the document is just one page of the manuscript. And then within the manuscript, there are what I call the fragments. And we can think of the fragments as the individual lines of text for whatever appeared on that page. And the fragments then can have different kinds of relationships. It could be the English translation, it could be the original German, or down the line, as Rebecca mentioned, the modern German, once that gets pulled in as well. These are all just separate lines in a database that we can then pull together. We can keep things arranged in the order that they're supposed to be in. And it also means like, the line of English more or less lines up with the line of German the way that it should, and so on and so forth. And so we try to keep all of that in order. The other thing too with the data model, and one of the things that I think is another kind of challenge that you get with this, is trying to think about kind of interactions that you want with the object that you're trying to create. Of course, like in a digital environment, we can do lots of interesting things with these physical objects that we couldn't do if we tried to reproduce it like as another print book, right? It's cool to have like a copy of the manuscript sitting on my shelf, but there are ways in which we can pull in the forensic images, or we can pull in the music or the hymns in a way that, of course, is just like impossible to do in another printed version of the manuscript. And so when we think about these data models, we're also thinking a lot about, what are the kind of interactions that, we want as a team? What are the things that we hope it can do? But also, what are the things that users may want to do with it as well? Both things that we're designing, but also ways that we're sort of maybe trying to anticipate what a user might be interested in. I'm pretty sure we probably had a pretty big list of what this looked like early on. There are certainly things that didn't make it into this, unfortunately, constraints of time and everything else. But But anyway, that's to all say, like, thinking about these models and thinking about the way that we can represent this thing does take a lot of time and a lot of thought, and just trying to get it right. And I mean, speaking for myself, I think it turned out pretty well. Yeah, and I think the other thing too, when it comes to the design of the project, is like an interface here. One of the things I was trying to do was, in a way, give a user or a reader a sort of density of information, right? The thing to privilege, of course, is the page itself. And we wanted to make sure we had this kind of interactivity so we could zoom in and out and really see things really clearly, but also to give people contextual clues about where they're at within the manuscript. So, of course, we can page through previous and next, and you can get a little preview of what's coming. But we can also jump to a different page. So if you know what page you're on, or what page you're looking for, you can jump right to it. Or if you need to read it, or if you'd like to read the transcription, you can jump right to that and find it. There are, of course, different details attached to various pages within the manuscript, and then, of course, we provide a way to cite this as well. So if you're using these pages in another published work or another digital project or something like that, we have a way that you can also cite those things and pull those things in. One of the other design things I think we thought about, and Rebecca and Catherine were just talking about the forensic page. There was a lot of thought, I think, around how we were going to present this to users. One idea, I think, early on was that we would just have that within the manuscript interface, and users could sort of, I don't know, I guess, stumble across these forensic images within here. But we sort of realized pretty quickly, like, there's like 300 plus pages within the manuscript. Paging through each set of pages just to find the forensic images, I mean, it's like a needle in a haystack kind of problem. And we decided we don't want to do that. We want to make this a little bit easier for people. So for some of the things that at least I sort of think of as unique features of the manuscript, things like these forensic images, things like the music scores, these get their own pages within the web application or within the website, to really, I think, highlight some of the unique things that are going on within the manuscript as well. Again, I think just like trying to find this on the manuscript page as a whole would be really difficult. But being able to pull these out and think of these as a kind of almost like a kind of index to jump right to what you want to look at, I think was a helpful way to kind of work around this issue. I guess I can show two if we want to see it quick. So, like, behind the scenes, what does this look like? One of the nice things about Django is it comes with a sort of built-in admin interface. So I didn't have to build any of this, which is kind of nice. It's also highly customizable, so I could change lots of things in here. I think that's like one key thing I always want to hammer on with Django is, because we're building the data model, because we're building the templates that make the site work and look the way that it does, as a team, we have like total control over what this thing does and how it looks, rather than trying to like take an object and fit it into something that's, like off the shelf. And in that way, I think we have a lot of like flexibility and creativity in the way that we can present this particular object. Like I said, we have this document view. The documents are the individual pages within the manuscript. So if we were to open one of these, for example, you can see that there are just various fields in here. These just get filled out, as you'd expect on any kind of field within on the web. Everything has a unique identifier. There's descriptions if they're needed. There's, the side of the document that you're looking at. There's different types of documents if we need them. The page that we're looking at, so on and so forth. Most of this came to me as a spreadsheet. So things were just filled out by the team that included all of these metadata fields. I'm pretty sure what we ended up doing was I built these interfaces and then generated a spreadsheet out of that and passed that off to the Winterthur folks. They could then fill things out, and then within Django, we can just import that data. So a lot of this wasn't, it wasn't like we were doing web forms, line by line by hand, but we were able to fill out all that data in a spreadsheet, which is kind of a more natural way, I think, to work with some of this anyway. And then import all this, pull everything in, make the connections where they need to be within the database. And yeah, have everything right here. It also means that if there are edits that need to happen to the data, or if there's content that needs to be added, that can all happen here, right? We can treat the Django application and this sort of admin interface as the source of truth for the manuscript. And so if there is something that needs to be changed, if I fumbled something and got the page number wrong or something like that, we can come in here, fix that really quickly just by editing it, save it, and we're good to go. And of course, that then instantly updates on the website, because this is all just reading straight from the database. All right, I think I'll leave it there. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but if folks have thoughts or questions, of course, happy to entertain them. Or if Catherine or Rebecca, if you have any.
Yeah. I just had a couple other thoughts where you're talking about, like, the presentation of the forensic, only because, thinking about like all these great ideas and all the things this site is going to do, and then, really thinking it through to what is most meaningful and useful and practical. There had been an idea from early on to have every single page have forensic evidence or some tidbit on it, but we realized pretty quickly it would get real boring. It would be like, and here's green again, and this is what the green is used. And that would be like on all the pages, and just as Jason is saying, it would sort of distill, or it would water down rather the meaningful pieces of this. And so there are, on the pages that do have the forensic images, you can find them on those pages, but you can also find them elsewhere. And so I think that's a key point. And also, if you're here and you're working on digital projects, you already know this, but like to get those spreadsheets back to Jason, there was a person that was hired on our end. We had a amazing translator, as we all were, Rebecca was mentioning, but who, experienced many different issues, health and family wise, along the way. So, the work to even get this, once we decided on that model, to Jason, so it was usable, was, quite substantive in, sitting and filling out those spreadsheets. So just to reiterate that.
Yeah. The other thing too, like thinking about like the wish list item that we weren't able to get to, the one thing I wish we could have done, I'm pretty sure we talked about it pretty early on. There was a plan, I think, at one point that instead of having these forensic images off to the side like this, we talked about actually having like a kind of overlay that would fit over top of this image.
Yeah.
So we could, like, highlight the point that was supposed to have the image, or like have a toggle or something like that. I wish we had the time to do it. I think that would have been really cool.
Could be a future iteration.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, let's start there then with the Q&A. And again, if you have questions, please either pop them in the chat or please do raise your hand. But inevitably, with all of these kinds of projects, there always is at the beginning a kind of, wouldn't it be cool if? And you've talked a little bit about some of those, but what are some more of those wouldn't it be cool if that popped up in the beginning that either may find expression later on, or technically for reasons technical or otherwise, are just not at the point where those can be executed?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think the interactivity with the text itself, so as Jason mentioned, being able to do some kind of layering or interactivity with the manuscript where we could overlay or pull out certain details. That's something that I think we actually talked about quite late into the process, and we're trying to figure out ways to make that work. And between a combination of thinking about how people actually engage with the manuscript and sort of centering that, the decision to simplify in some of those areas was really important. But I think that there is still some interest in and some potential future for, especially on those forensic pieces or on the illustrations, being able to do more of that kind of interactivity and just make the best use of, technology in the way that it can enhance and highlight that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think two things that were mentioned. One that so you'll see there's a thing for modern German, and that is not there. Really, we doubled down on what is the most useful. It is that transcription and then the English translation. The modern German is sort of more value added, and I'm not sure when that one would come. There was also an initial idea to have this be like a book on tape, so you could hear it being read aloud. And I'm again not sure what the huge demand is for that. So maybe a sampling in the future. Um, yeah, for our old German speaking friends who are driving along the road, which don't align a whole lot. But yeah, that the thing that will come, that really is just capacity on the people you see on the screen. Literature has a few objects here. So we will there's really nice complementary things we can do with the rest of the collections, not just the paper-based works on paper Fraktur media, but you see these wonderful tulip designs, some of the other things that we see expressed in redware, and some of the hats that people are wearing. We actually have a Lancaster made hat that looks like some of the women are wearing. So to point to those in a select group, but we didn't want to just sort of throw it in there. So that will be coming soon.
And as you were talking, all of you, I was thinking about, and especially as Jason was talking there at the end, the kind of the genealogy, the digital genealogy of projects like this. Um, in part, in one sense, you could load this up and display a book just like HathiTrust or Google Books or something like that. But this brings to bear a whole slew of projects that have come before, and especially technical development. What were some of the projects you kind of had in mind as you approached doing this, and what did you borrow and reconfigure to make this project work for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think one of the things I had in mind, although maybe I wasn't like totally aware totally aware of it, um, back longer than I care to admit here in grad school, I was a project manager on a digital manuscript, and I remember one of the things. This is for William F. Cody. This was a project at the University of Nebraska, and we built this archive of Cody's collections and different things related to him. And I remember one of the things we did in that was a lot of these transcriptions, translations, if they existed for certain things. There were people that were kind of coming and going within like his Wild West exhibition and things like that. But I remember the layout we designed for that, which is probably still the layout today, was it primarily focused on the text, right? So the transcription of the material, and the object became like less prominent. You could see it, you could click on it and like make it bigger and whatnot. Um, but I always thought it should maybe be the other way. I guess like I like the idea that you privilege the thing. Just because I don't know, it's the object that we're trying to put online. It's the object that we're trying to provide context to, or um, build certain kind of interaction around. And I think the way that we ended up doing it, where we really do try to privilege the manuscript, um, like the physical thing, not just the digital thing.
Hmm.
I don't know. It sort of felt like the right approach to me. But
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I spent a lot of time early in my career sort of working on, TEI initiatives and that kind of collaborative research. And so I've always been inspired by, those projects that are able to bring together this textual analysis with the kind of collaborative research. And so I don't know that I had a particular, project in mind, but, I sort of go back to things like, like the Alex catalog and the writings of Cooper, text project and the Brown Women's Writers Project and things like that, where there is this interactivity between scholars and the thing that they're analyzing. And so I think that that's something, for me in conversations with Jason about how to translate the data model, to this item, being able to trace through, to connect translations to the page, to connect translations and transcriptions in the data model, to be able to replicate that kind of engagement, textual engagement. Sorry, Catherine, I think you were about to say something.
No. I was sitting here musing, and help me out because my brain is not working. For the Eastman, the Kodak, the photo archive, the name of the site, but
the Eastman,
yeah, it's great. But the way that is, you can look deeply and closely. It's again privileging the thing as object, but in a digital space, but that you can also find information easily and sort of get to the main point. Like it doesn't get lost in a whole shuffle of information. And if you want to read deeper, they point you to that. That's sort of that idea of like, go to the scholarship page if you want to read the essay. But I just want to look and find out something meaningful in this moment. I think that site has been really helpful in that way for me, as both a teacher and scholar. So I think that was one thing that was in my mind.
Related to teaching and scholarship, then, sort of two big questions for all the one, what are some of the questions you hope people might be able to answer using this particular digital project from a research interpretive standpoint? And then two, how would you imagine possibly using this in the classroom?
I hope other people have lots of ideas about this too. But I mean, like early Pennsylvania is an area of my interest. So this is like a great way really quickly to look at an image and begin to unpack an image to understand what might be informing that. And, some of this is scholarship again that you can look to on the site, but if someone hasn't even read those essays, you can use that visual culture to sort of think about, okay, what am I seeing? Am I seeing a direct snapshot of life in the past, or am I seeing something that is a modified version? And what sources are people looking to? I think it's actually brilliant for that. Religious scholars, I know Jason has someone who already sort of mentioned to him, and maybe you could talk about that, your colleague or professor, but I think that there's stuff about just understanding devotion and sacred practice that is interesting here. This is a very personal document, but also reflects communities, plural, of faith. There's simple questions as to, I think, looking like, if you're a dress scholar, here's some great examples of, 1784 regional clothing practices. There's bottles on tables and some of these things. They are not bottles from biblical times. These are like what you would find in the tavern in Lancaster. So horticulture, I actually hope some people look at this more for there are some beautiful renderings of floral materials that I think would be interesting to compare, that are not just sort of aestheticized, looking to a plate. These are actually, I think, looking to real things that we're growing. So I think that those are some of the things that I think about, but it goes on and on.
Yeah, Catherine just mentioned a colleague that reached out to me when the project launched. I don't know exactly what he's doing with it, I guess, these days, but he's an English professor, and I know he teaches a class on the Bible as literature. And so I think he seemed very excited about this project. So I should reach out. I'll have to reach back out to him and see how he's been using it.
And then just from what we're all talking about here, that just as a digital humanities project, even internally, when Rebecca and I were taking this over, the conversations we had to have on site with people about what accessibility of the visuals meant and what we needed to do. It was a good teaching moment. Let's just call it that. for people to understand, we actually didn't have to spend extra money and extra time and do 5 million extra things to it to make it at least, baseline accessible with screen readers and some of the other materials. Like that's like baked into the technology as it is. And, I shouldn't be flip about it. How would you know that if you didn't think about it? Right. So, but in a classroom, I think you could talk about what we're talking about here. Why does it not have some things? Why does it have some things? What would have been the pros and cons?
Kirsten has a great question. Can you share the data entry spreadsheet structure that ended up working for you? Do you have advice for solo scholars trying to create a workflow that would make their research transcriptions of manuscript sources easily adaptable to public-facing digitization?
Sure. So I can just kind of walk you through what the spreadsheet looks like. It's a lot simpler actually than I think than I think we kind of originally envisioned, given all the different pieces that we had to connect, from one place to another. And that's, Jason can speak to how that data model was created, on the technological sort of end of things. But from a data entry standpoint, we sort of separated these things into documents and fragments. So documents are the page, the actual thing that you're looking at, and fragments are the lines of text on the page. And we were able to connect these things using identifiers. This identifier represents a page in the book, and then for each of these assigning lines of translations and just going line by line and making sure that there was a connection point through the ID here, the item file name. We were also able to do things like put footnotes in this. These footnotes were primarily notes from our translator about editorial decisions that he made, and some of this references biblical passages or areas from the Bible that these lines are connected to or might reference. But it really was as simple as that. So the sort of biggest part of this, or the biggest effort, other than in actually just doing data entry and sort of being very careful in what we were putting into the spreadsheet, was doing the thinking through it early on in the project, and planning for how that interaction would take place, what this would look like on the data model, doing some testing back and forth to ensure that. And I see, Jason, you unmuted there.
Oh, yeah, I would just add too, like one of the things that we were trying to achieve with these sheets is it's a slightly awkward workflow, I'll say, because it's, we're trying to take a spreadsheet and fit it into a relational database, right? And so one of the things that's always important to me when I think about projects like this is if there are cases where, say, like a document page, for example, in this data set, that document page is never going to change, right? Now, there's a way you could sort of repeat, I suppose, that metadata code for each fragment or something like that. But if you made a typo somewhere, then you have to go back and find it and fix it. And it's it's going to be a mess. You could think of this even like a data set of places and place names, right? You wouldn't want to record every place name and its lat long and so on and so forth to repeat that within a spreadsheet. It'd be a lot easier if you had one sheet that just has the place names and their latitude, longitude, and another sheet that can handle the other data that should be associated with that place. We kind of do the same thing here, right? Where the file name for the fragment is associated with the document's unique ID. So those two things are exactly the same. And then in the database, we can just join those two things together, wherever it appears. Yeah. And so, one that lets us keep data consistent between, what might be multiple lines of a manuscript, but still keeps the page sort of intact as its own thing. But then as you can see there too, we also have line numbers. And so we can also keep track of like literally where on the page does this line appear, which again, for like the web application side, allows us to then like, I just need to sort by these line numbers and I'll know the order that these things should appear in. And, you know, if there's a mistake there or something, that's an easy fix. We can just go back, update the number, everything updates on the site, and, you know, we have it all there.
So this is Kirsten Sword here, following up the question. Thank you. So looking at this is a single spreadsheet for one for one page, or are you doing separate spreadsheets here?
It's for the entire thing.
The entire thing is in, okay.
One spreadsheet.
Yeah, no, I'm somebody who's returning to an ancient database that I created for a research project in FileMaker Pro and made relational without knowing what I was doing, and then trying to put it back into some sort of flat file format so that it can be adapted to current technology and preserved is kind of a nightmare. So I'm trying to figure out what people are doing this currently to try and solve that problem. So it's just, thank you.
Can I put a plug in for keeping it in a database?
I was going to say, does Ludwig have a
proprietary FileMaker Pro database? So.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I just wanted to say that what a fantastic project, and I'm so excited to see it and hear more about it. Good to see your faces, and hopefully I'll maybe talk more with you. As some of you may have heard, in last semester, we have a big project we're working on with the database, with an account book, and we've gone through many things. I made a few notes because, and I quoted you, you're trying to explore a book as a book, data model to a real world object, transcription to translation. And all of those things are things that are so universal to many of us trying to do this. And so kudos to you for being able to sort of lay those out, and perhaps it seems as if succeed. I'm looking at this one, I have lots of questions, but a few quick ones. One is that when you were looking at this, did you see it as a book or a manuscript? And how did you sort of walk those two distinctions? And did it matter?
Oh, lots of debates about that. Personally, I see this as a manuscript. This is a bound manuscript. So this is the product of original writing, original creativity. For me personally.
Yeah, I see it as a manuscript, but then informed by like that physical structure and logic of a book. So a bound manuscript, but I think actually a bound manuscript could be a lot of different things and not necessarily have the logic of a book. So I think this one does.
This allows you to tilt it towards an object more easily, I think, than say an account book or something that has a frame that is bookness. So just something I've tried to argue, well, it's the book is an object, and how do we sort of do that? So I'm going to ask you two hard questions. And one is, I know you had to make a lot of decisions along the way, and that things steps backward and steps forward. What were some of the things that you did wrong, or you had to sort of drop along the way you might have liked to do? So we can all learn from, well, we can all pull all of our own in a pile, but just curious what some of the things you've learned along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were some, as Catherine said, some value added elements that we ultimately decided needed to be tabled for the time being.
Right.
We worked with our wonderful colleagues in educational programs, but that is an incredibly understaffed area of this institution, and there were things that we wanted to be able to do in terms of, lesson plans for teachers and connections to the collection that will happen eventually. But in order to preserve our time and energy and to really focus it on what we saw were the core activities of this project, the interactivity with the manuscript, being able to connect it with scholarship, the forensic piece, and the music, some of those other areas I think just needed to be tabled for the time being.
The very last question, when do you stop? Which is kind of what you're alluding to, that there is no stopping when you have the resources of an institution. But do you see all the great what ifs, or is it point to just say, we have other things to do?
Well, there were external deadlines with our partners
Right.
at the center.
Right.
So that really shapes what are the core things we want to do the soul searching, what are the extras. I mean, Jason works on other things too, like this isn't all Denig all the time, So yeah, so that really, but I think that was good for this project. If you read the application to the Getty, it is like wide ranging, it is ambitious. I think we caught all of the core main goals of it. It just manifested in a more streamlined way. So I actually think it's a better project, and I'm not just saying that because we were involved with it, but I really think it needed like an editor, and it got an editor to it because of necessity. So that phase had to end, and we got it so it was a complete thing that you can go in and look, and you do, I mean, yeah, you don't see the modern German, but otherwise I don't think you'd think that something's like missing. What we now have is phase 2 of how can we build it so we can, as easily as possible, make it additive in substantive ways with additional scholarship, adding some of that object things that are going to be manageable both by in-house, maybe a little bit of expertise from the external there, but I see it as a phase 1 and a phase 2. And the phase 1 really had to be like, what are our core goals and how can we achieve that?
Yeah, I think there's a way too in which you like, I guess I try to build these projects with an eye towards the future. There is, of course, for reasons of resources or time or money or whatever, that a project does sort of sometimes have just a hard stop. But I mean, I think one of the great advantages of doing digital history is that we have this way where these projects can remain iterative, that can continue to grow in certain ways or be edited in certain ways. Again, going back to my point about like, this isn't just another published thing. It's got advantages that you couldn't have otherwise. And so I think that too, also like building towards the future as best as we can. I mean, certainly we're not going to be able to like do super rich features or I don't know, like data visualizations or something like that. That would require like a whole new round of engineering or something. But having ways where we can put up new essays or we can add new kinds of data or something, trying to keep some of that in mind as well, I think is helpful for these projects.
Yeah, and I would say, because we were dedicated from the very beginning, that this involved a lot of different people. Truly, the people management part of it. I mean, I don't know, Jason, you can speak to the technical, but like it was just as much of a project as the rest.
Yeah.
And life intervened, and a lot of people had a lot of life intervening along the way. And I think it's just so fantastic that we ended up with those core pieces, and it required kindness and coaxing hand in hand.
Well put.
Well, I think that's a great place to end our discussion today. Kindness and coaxing going hand in hand and into the forest to the future. Well, Catherine, Jason, Rebecca, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Great to see you all. And definitely listen to the music files. It's fantastic to hear that sound. So
Thank you. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks, friends. Take care.